No Kings protests happened Saturday, June 14th, 2025, across the U.S.
Right. And our goal here today for you listening is just to unpack what these sources say happened and maybe touch on the why.
Exactly. Based purely on the material we've got.
And that date, June 14th, it's significant. The sources state these protests were deliberately timed. There was this big U.S. Army 250th anniversary parade in D.C.
Which also happened to be the president's birthday.
And interestingly, the organizers specifically chose not to protest in D.C., but elsewhere. That's those sources highlight.
And the core slogan, No Kings, yeah, it's pretty direct.
Very. It draws this clear line, according to the organizers' framing in the sources, between what they saw as modern authoritarian trends and, historical monarchy, tying it back to American founding ideas.
Sort of sets the whole tone.
Definitely. And the sources mention who was behind it, quite a coalition. Over 200 groups, apparently.
Yeah, I saw names like Move On, Public Citizen, the ACLU, even unions like the AFT and CWA. And this 5501 movement coordinating the U.S. side.
That's what the material says.
And they really talked up the numbers, didn't they? Organizers claiming millions showed up, over 2,000 events, all 50 states.
They did claim that. But right away, the sources present the sharp contrast. There's a quote from a White House official just dismissing it.
Calling it a complete and utter failure, minuscule attendance.
Exactly those words. Now, the sources do add the caveat that multiple news outlets and the organizers themselves contradicted that attendance claim. But that official dismissal is definitely part of the narrative presented.
So what was driving people, according to the organizers' message in these sources?
The main theme seems to be this idea of authoritarian excess and corruption. That's the umbrella term used.
Okay, and under that?
Concerns about democratic norms being weakened, specific immigration policies. Sources mention recent raids, chants like no IC, no KKK, no fascist USA. Also alleged attacks on free speech, universities, judges, that sort of thing.
And billionaire first politics was mentioned too, plus the parade itself.
Right. They didn't just see the parade as a backdrop. They called it costly, wasteful, and un-American, framed it as politicizing the military.
So that was a specific target.
And the sources also list other grievances like federal job cuts, the VA's condition, worries about national parks, a whole range of issues.
Okay, so that's the why, from the organizers' perspective, as presented. What about the what? What actually happened at these events? Organizers stressed nonviolence, right? Said the vast majority were peaceful.
They did emphasize that commitment, but the sources we have also make a point of detailing specific incidents where things got tense or even violent.
Like in Los Angeles.
Yeah. The material says clashes with police happened after the official protest wound down. Police declared an unlawful assembly, used flashbangs, tear gas, made arrests.
In Salt Lake City, that sounds serious. A shooting reported.
A shooting at one event, yes. One person critically injured, 3 arrests made, according to the source. Pretty significant.
Denver, too. Flashes there.
Pepper balls, smoke canisters mentioned. Apparently after marchers tried getting onto a highway interchange. Arrests there, too.
And reports of vehicles hitting protesters in Virginia and San Francisco.
Oh.
Though the sources say details on intent were varied.
Correct. And it wasn't just the main protests. The sources mentioned some smaller, isolated counter-protests. Groups identified as Proud Boys in Atlanta, for example, or Trump supporters in Midland, Texas.
And the signs and chants. We saw No Kings, obviously.
Yeah, and classics like Whose Streets? Our Streets. Also, Trump Must Go Now, and Republic Yes, Monarchy No.
Plus some creative ones the sources picked up, like the King Salmon one or Trump is a Taco King. Adds a bit of color.
It does. Now, how did people react after? The organizers, as you'd expect, framed it as a huge win. A massive, people-powered movement demonstrating democratic commitment.
Which, again, is the polar opposite of that White House official calling it a minuscule failure. Stark contrast there.
Absolutely. And then there's the government response in some states. The sources note Republican governors in places like Virginia and Missouri mobilized the National Guard,
vowing zero tolerance for disruption or violence.
That's the phrase used in the material. Though it also notes that the clashes themselves seem to have been largely isolated, despite that mobilization.
So if we try to, pull these threads together from the sources, there's this fundamental tension, isn't there?
There really is. On one hand, you have the organizers' narrative. This is a necessary response to perceived authoritarianism, a defense against tyranny. That's their frame.
But on the other hand?
Well, the counter-narrative implied or stated in the sources questions that. Is it genuine constitutional concern, Or is it more politically motivated opposition using kingship as maybe hyperbole? And the reports of disorder raise questions too.
It points to that classic tension, street protests versus established processes, rule of law versus expressing dissent, sometimes disruptively.
Exactly. The sources put that right out there. The protesters' own republic versus monarchy theme speaks to constitutional order, while the incidents and the government response highlight the challenges for public safety, for resources, when these large protests happen.
So for you listening, what does this boil down to? We've walked through what the sources lay out. The organizers' goals, their big claims on numbers, the incidents that did happen, and these completely different takes on success or failure from organizers versus the administration.
Right, and given these very conflicting accounts, massive success versus utter failure, peaceful movement versus disruptive incidents, what does that tell you about how we even understand public protest today, and where that balance lies between dissent and order in a republic? It's definitely a complex picture the sources leave you with.
So if we try to, pull these threads together from the sources, there's this fundamental tension, isn't there?
There really is. On one hand, you have the organizers' narrative,